Hey guys, this is Mitch with Fine Point CGI, and today we're going to talk about what a editor script is inside of Godot. So we're going to go through the process of explaining what an editor script is. We are going to basically build an editor script that allows us to create rigid body objects from mesh objects and generate collision for those mesh objects. And we're going to go ahead and also add those objects to a group and talk a little bit about some of the weird caveats along the way of some of those interactions. So that's what I have in store for you guys today. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so an editor script is a one-time or maybe multi-time use script inside of Godot. So a lot of times you can use this for doing something like maybe doing a bunch of operators on some nodes and some scenes, or maybe doing really just about anything that you guys could possibly want. Now, the difference between an editor script, a editor panel, and an editor tool is that editor scripts are kind of designed to run once, and the rest of them are something that you can execute over and over and over and over, and are supposed to be designed to help you with doing operators a lot of times. So for instance, like you've seen before with the editor panel, you had a actual panel that you could click and add things, and you had a scene that you could modify and do fancy stuff with. But with an editor script, it's a little bit less as fancy, if that makes sense. So I'm going to kind of demonstrate how that works. So what we can do is I have a object here. If I open up my documents here, I have an object here called pillar fractured. I'm going to drag that into Godot, and I'm going to go ahead and import this. And I have this object down in the description below. I have a link to it to my Google Drive, and you guys can just go ahead and pull it down and use it for whatever you would like to use it. Or if you want, you could just use it for this project. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on the GLB file. I'm going to go ahead and make a new inherited scene. And you'll see that this object has a bunch of fractures in it. Now, the goal here is to basically change all of these mesh instances to a rigid body, add collision to it, maybe rename it, and make it so that it's set a part of its own group, so that way I can kind of disseminate what it is inside of code. So what we'll do is first, we need to change this to a actual object, not an instance. You can see that it's grayed out here, and that basically means that it's a link to the GLB file. And we don't want that link, because that link is going to not allow us to edit the structure of these objects. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and save this as pillared fractured. And the reason why is because since these guys are instances, you can't change it until you've saved the scene. So let's go ahead and right click it and clear its instance, and let's go ahead and clear those instances. So you can see that now we have a bunch of cube objects, and we can go ahead and rearrange them and adjust them. We can go ahead and attach a child node and add in a rigid body like that, and we can kind of drag this guy into here. And previously we were not able to do those kinds of operators, right? It didn't allow us. We can also do stuff like adding in our simplified collision, right? So you can see now this little object here has collision, which is cool, but we can't really do this when it's instanced in and when it has a reference back to that GLB file. So what we'll do, because I'm going to undo all of that, is we're going to go ahead and create a script. So we're going to go over to our script. We're going to right click, go up to file. We're going to click new script, and we are going to call this set up destruction objects.gd, and we're going to go ahead and click create. Now you'll see it says extend node, and that's it. We have our nice little ready here, just like most of our other Godot code, right? Well, we don't need any of this, and we don't really need this, and we don't really want a node, right? We want it to be an editor script, right? So we need to extend our editor script. And we want this to run in the editor, right? So we have to make it a tool. right? Because a tool means, if you've seen my other tutorials, that means that we can run this in the editor. So now what we can do is we can go ahead and run our little script, right? So if we say print hello world and I go to file and I do run, you'll see, hold on, we can't run this script. Did you forget the run method? And yes, we did. So inside of an editor script, you can't use a ready or anything like that. It has to be in an underscore run method here. Okay, so now if we go to file and we click run, you'll see if we go to our output, you'll see hello world. So now we can do some really cool stuff with this, right? So what are some of the cool things that we can do? Well, first, let's go ahead and get back all the children objects of the object we have selected. So if we select this object and we run this script, it'll pull back all the child objects that we have selected. So let's go back to our script and go ahead and do that. So we'll come in here and we'll say var children, and I'm going to make that an array, is equal to get underscore editor interface. And get editor interface is getting our editor interface. It's literally getting the interface that we have, the thing that we interact with. And then we can say dot get selection, and that's going to pull back the selected object, but it could be anything. It could be, you know, this spatial transform object. It could be this editor description, right? Whatever we have selected. But we want to pull back whatever nodes we have selected, right? So we can just say dot get underscore selected nodes. Now that's going to return an array, and customarily I would handle that just by saying, okay, well, they obviously want us to do it, run this operator on all these things. But in this case, let's go ahead and just pull back the first one, and we'll just say dot get underscore children. And then what we can do is we can print our children. So now if we save this and we make sure we have our pillar fractured selected, we go to file and we choose run, you'll see that we get back a bunch of cube objects. It just happens to be the same cube objects that these guys are, which is pretty cool. So now how would we go about looping through our children and adding a rigid body to it? Well, that's pretty simple. What we can do is we can say for child in children, then we can say var body as a rigid body is equal to rigidbody.new, right? And that's going to go ahead and instance that object into existence, right? And then we can just go ahead and use that child object, right? And just say, okay, we're going to make this a child of our object, right? Simple enough. So we could just say var child object as a mesh instance is equal to our child. That way we have syntax highlighting, right? We want to make sure that we have our mesh instance. And if we're going to cast this object as a mesh instance, we might want to check to make sure if child is mesh instance, then let's do this, right? Because we don't want us to get a null reference here saying, hey, you can't cast a collision body as a mesh instance, or you don't want it to say, hey, you know, why are you trying to do this to a sprite, right? It will really mess with your code and cause it to crash if you are not careful. So what if we just say child object dot add child body? So if we save that and we run this, we go file, run, and make sure you guys don't save after you run this because we're going to have to reopen this a lot. So just to let you guys know. So if we go ahead and hit run. So what happened? You see how it didn't work. So this is one of the big bugbears, or I guess not really a bugbear, it's more of a feature inside of Godot, but it's something that you have to understand. Inside of Godot, you have your edited tree and your game tree, and they're two totally separate worlds. When a script executes, it executes on this, I don't know how to explain it, kind of like to me, it's almost like a open space, right? And if you don't notify the editor that this object has been created and it needs to be added to the tree's stack, it won't link to your interface, if that makes sense. So the question is how can we solve this? Well, what we can do is we can go ahead and say body dot set underscore owner, and then we can go ahead and set its owner. Now, its owner needs to be something like a parent object of some description. So you could do something like child object dot get underscore tree dot get edited underscore scene underscore root. And you could try that, right? That's going to go ahead and pull back our tree, right? Our working tree. And it's going to get the edited scene root, which is the root of our edited scene. That would be this scene right here. And then it sets this as its owner. So let's see if that works. So let's go ahead and say file, run, and you'll notice that that worked. So to explain this a little bit more, you're basically telling your editor that this body exists and that it should be a part of this stack. So now we're about, I would say, part of the way there, right? We have our rigid bodies, but they actually need to be the parent of these guys, right? So let's go ahead and do that. So what we'll do is we'll close our scene here. We won't save it, and we'll go ahead and reopen it. That way we can retest our editor script. And what we can do is we can go ahead and say, okay, so now that we have this, let's go ahead and make our child object here. So these mesh instances, let's make them children of our body, right? That would make sense. So we could just say body dot add child object, right? If we run this, and the hotkey for this is Shift Control X, by the way, if you want to do that, you'll notice that it fails because I forgot to select this. So let's do that. Control Shift X, and you'll notice that it says, well, hold on a minute. You can't do this because it already has a parent, pillar fractured. Okay, so what that means is you can't set the parent of an object that already has a parent, right? It doesn't work that way. You need to actually tell it to not have a parent object anymore before you can set it. So let's go ahead and do that. So when we come, let's come up here and let's say var parent as a node is equal to child object dot get parent, and that'll pull back this object's parent. Okay, so now we've got the cube's parent, which is this guy right here. It's basically the selected object. We could probably just use get editor interface, get selection, get selected, and that would technically return the same thing, but we'll stick with what we have right now. So then what we can do is we can say parent dot remove child. And let's go ahead and remove our child object. So now this should work, right? If we run this, you would think it would work, right? So if we go ahead and run this, so run, you'll notice that if we clear this and we attempt it again real quick, you'll notice that we have attempted to call function get edited scene root on base null instance. So that's not a good sign. Let's see if we are instancing our body still. We are. So we're trying to set our child object as the child of our body, but our body is attempting to get the tree of the edited scene root, and that's coming back as null. So why is that? Well, when we remove an object from being a child of an object in the tree, when it gets removed, it gets put in somewhere in memory, right? It gets just put somewhere in memory space, right? It's no longer a part of that tree. And you can't just set the owner of the tree if the tree doesn't exist, right? So we're doing right here, we're saying get tree. But since it doesn't exist, it doesn't exist. So instead we have to say parent dot get tree, right? And now if we run it, what does it do? Well, now it's gone. So that's good. We've thoroughly broken our little editor script, right? So why did it break? Well, first, because body does not exist on our parent, right? Our parent does not have a child of our body. So that's one reason why these guys are gone. Number two, we have some funkiness here with how we're adding our children. So let's take this and let's move this down here. And instead, let's say parent.addChild body. And let's see what that does. So if I close this and I actually delete this because I hit Control S because I forgot. So let's do this. New inherited, right click, save it, right click, and go ahead and clear inheritance because I'm going to make that mistake 1,000 times today. So let's go ahead and go to File and Run. You'll notice that we got our rigid bodies, but you'll notice that our child object is gone. So now you're sitting here wondering, well, what the heck? I just had my child object in existence, right? That mesh instance was there and now it's gone. Well, when we removed it from the stack, it got taken off the stack. So we need to now reset it back onto the stack, if that makes sense. So how can we do that? Well, what we can do is we can do the exact same thing we did here with body. We can say child object dot set underscore owner. And then we can literally do the same thing. Body dot get tree. And I'll just pull back actually this little bit of code here instead of rewriting it. So we'll just do that. And now I made that mistake again. I hit Control S. So let me delete this again. And then let me reopen this. New inherited. Let me get rid of this guy. Control S, save, and do this again, because I'm going to make this mistake quite a bit today. So go ahead and run this. Run. And now you'll see that it worked. Awesome. So now that we have this working, what's next? Well, if I go ahead and close this and not save, so that way I don't make this mistake. And now, what can we do with this? Well, first, let's create the collision objects that we need, right? Remember how we were talking earlier that we need to create collision objects. So let's do that. What we can do is we can say child object dot create convex collision. And we're going to go ahead and just allow it to have, the standard convex collision. And then we can go ahead and try and run this. So if we go ahead and click this and click run, nice, we have everything kind of running. But you'll notice that we have a static body here in between our mesh and our collider. And also our collider kind of needs to be on our rigid body, right? So what can we do to fix that? Well, if I close this and I reopen it and I select pillar real quick, what we can do is we can do a little bit of fancy translation here. So what we can do is we can say var collider is equal to child object dot get child, and we'll pull back the 0 index, and then we're going to go ahead and grab its child, and we're going to pull back the 0 index as well. With our generated code, we know that it's going to be the first index on both ends, right? Because there's no way else this code can work out because of how we've coded it. So what we can do is we can say child object dot get child, and we'll grab back that first index like we did before, dot remove child, and we're going to go ahead and remove our collider. And then we can go ahead and say body dot add child collider. So much like we did before, we have to remove it from being the child of somebody else and then add it to being the child of somebody else, which means just like before, we have to do the same thing that we did up here. So let's go ahead and just copy this. And then let's go ahead and paste it in just like that. And let's go ahead and change this to collider.setOwner body.getTree edited scene root. And that will allow us to throw that object into there. Now, we don't need that static body that we had, right? So what we can do is we basically can just say child object dot get child 0 dot queue free. And that'll actually remove that static body from our stack completely. So now what happens if we run this? So if we hit Shift Control X, you'll see that we have set up our objects. Awesome. So that's really the power of these things, right? But you'll notice all of our collision and everything is at the center right here, which is not great. And you'll also notice that we didn't add it to a group or anything. So we're going to need to do that. So let's go ahead and close this and don't save. And then double click on our scene again and click on pillar fractured once more and click on our script here. So first, let's fix that object being in the center of the world, right? Well, how would we go about fixing that? What we could do is we could set the translation and rotation of our object before we change its parent. And we'll come up here to where we're removing our child object. And just before we do that removal, let's go ahead and say body dot transform is equal to our child object dot transform. And that's just going to move it into the correct space. Now we're going to need to do the exact same thing, but the opposite when we reparent our object down here. So I believe we do it, let's see, parent.add child, body.add child. So we're going to need to come in here and do the same thing, but the opposite, because if we don't, our child object is still going to have that transform, which means it's going to get shoved over a little bit and it's going to be offset just slightly. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll say child object dot translation is equal to vector 3 0, 0, 0, and then we can do the same thing, child object dot rotation is equal to a vector 3 0, 0, 0, and that will solve that problem. Now the last question that we had was, how would we go about adding it to a group? Well, just like everything else, we can just basically say body dot add to group quote, and I'm going to say destructible. And I'm going to say comma true. And what that's going to do is that's going to add it to a group and it's going to make it persistent. If you don't have that true, it will not make it persistent, and it only happens until the end of the script execution. So that's something to keep in mind. So now that we have this selected, let's go ahead and run it. All right, so if we look at our node, we look at our groups, we have our destructible group there. Everything's in its correct place. All of the rigid bodies are in its correct place. And if we go ahead and save this and we create a new scene and we add in a 3D scene and we go ahead and add in a child node and we add in a mesh instance here. Let's go ahead and go to our inspector, add in a plane mesh, and let's scale this up. And if we drag in our pillar fractured and we right click on our spatial node and add in a camera, and we put this over here like this, and we hit play and we save our scene, you'll see that it falls through the world, but you get the idea of how it works. It actually works pretty well. We'll put a static body in here and we'll go ahead and add collision to that. And let's just make it a cube. There we go. And we can just kind of make this, I don't know, about this big, give or take, and make it super thin. There we go. So now if we hit play, you'll see that it just falls right apart. So that's kind of the power of editor scripts. For us to be able to do that by hand would take forever. If we go into our pillar fractured here, if you right click up here and you do hey, expand, collapse all, and you take a look at it, there's 48 of those objects. And doing all of this by hand, especially if you have a project that has lots of rigid bodies and lots of fractured objects, doing that operator over and over and over, where we add a mesh in and we put a rigid body in and we generate our collision and then we add it to the group and stuff like that, that's going to take forever. But with editor scripts, you can make it almost instantaneous. It's super quick and it's really awesome. And with editor scripts, you literally can do anything that you can do inside of Godot inside of your editor script. So if there's anything crazy that you want to do, you could have it generate thousands of polygons. You could have it run hundreds of things and it would do it with no problem at all. Now, after going through all three different methods of doing editor scripts inside of Godot, which one's your favorite? I really like, my personal favorite is the panel method. I think that's really cool because you can create a scene and buttons and things like that. And to me, it's really flexible. It does add an additional tab into your project, but really it's nice because you can organize a bunch of editor scripts in that one spot, right? So it'd be really nice. But I'm curious what your guys' opinion is. Let me know in the comments below. But that is all I have for you guys today. So if you like this video, go ahead and hit that like button. Hey, if you dislike this video, go ahead and hit the dislike button because I'm here to make content for you guys. Now, this video, as with all of the videos on this channel, are viewer suggested. So if you have a suggestion, please throw them in the comments below and I'll be more than happy to make a video for you. I have a bunch of tutorials on my list, but I will always get to your idea. And sometimes, you know, ideas get moved forward or backward depending on the demand and how much, you know, how interesting it is to me at the time. So, you know, I'm always up for any kind of suggestion that you may have. And hey, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments below, or you can jump on our Discord and ask any of the guys there and we will all help you out. Link is in the description below for that. But that is all I have for you guys today. So thank you so much again for watching, and I will see you all next time. Thanks.